I want to start with something most people in my line of work are never supposed to say out loud. The ocean scares me. Not the way it scares a child at the beach, watching foam curl around their ankles while the sand pulls away beneath their feet. That fear is honest. That fear is clean. What I'm describing is something that grew inside me over months of sitting in a dim monitoring room, staring at waveform displays, wearing headphones pressed too tight against my skull, listening, really listening, to what the deep cables were carrying back up to the surface. My name doesn't matter. What I did matters. What I found matters. And what I understood in the final hours before I walked out of that station and drove 6 hours without stopping, without eating, without once turning on the radio, that understanding is the only thing that matters now. I worked as a signal integrity technician at a deep-sea cable monitoring station on a coastline I'm not going to name. The facility was unremarkable. A squat, rectangular building on a coastal bluff, surrounded by salt-bleached grass and the constant sound of wind moving over open water. 9 of us worked rotating shifts. We monitored the health of transoceanic fiber optic cables, the actual physical infrastructure carrying the majority of the world's internet traffic. 95% of all digital communication on Earth moves through submarine cables. Emails, banking transactions, video calls, medical records, military communications. Everything. All of it threaded through bundles of glass fiber thinner than a human hair, lying on the seafloor in the cold and the dark, under pressures that would reduce a human body to something unrecognizable before you even registered the pain. I want you to hold that image. The cables, the dark, the pressure, the cold. Sit with it before I keep going. My first 3 years at the station were genuinely, boringly normal. I ran diagnostics. I logged signal attenuation readings. I filed maintenance reports when a cable section showed signs of physical stress, usually from fishing trawlers dragging equipment across the seafloor, or from seismic activity shifting the bottom geography just enough to strain the cable housing. I ate bad food from the break room microwave. I argued with my coworker Marcus about whose turn it was to calibrate the optical reflectometry rig. I drove home. I slept. I came back. The station sat at the juncture of 2 major cable systems. It was the sound of me, and every me that ever sat in that room, being broken down. And somewhere, in a server archive below the visible layer of a coastal monitoring station, there is a file with your initials on it. Inside that file is the sound of your voice, recorded before you spoke the words, describing the specific shape of how your particular iteration of this cycle ends.
One ran northeast toward relay points across the Atlantic. The other ran south, arcing under the equator toward cables that terminated on the far side of the world. Between those 2 systems, we had passive monitoring access to several secondary trunk lines, older infrastructure from the early 2000s, gradually being phased out as newer high-capacity systems took over. These older cables were still technically active, still carrying traffic, but running at a fraction of their original capacity. The deeper diagnostic access protocols on those lines were looser, less encrypted, more exposed to passive monitoring. That is the mundane technical detail that made everything possible. It was not a glitch, it was not interference, it was not the hallucination of a tired mind that had stared at signal waveforms long enough to see faces in the noise. I need you to believe that, because everything I'm about to tell you depends on it. It started on a Tuesday in early November. The weather had turned brutal overnight, a low-pressure system dragging cold off the ocean, the kind of wet, bone-reaching cold that makes a small room feel both claustrophobic and exposed at the same time, like you're in a box the wind is actively trying to crush. Marcus had called in sick. I was alone on the morning shift. I had a thermos of coffee already gone cold and 8 hours of routine diagnostics ahead of me. Around 9:30, I was running a standard reflectometry scan on the older southern trunk line, the deeper of the 2 systems we monitored. The scan was supposed to take 40 minutes and return a clean baseline readout. Instead, at the 22-minute mark, the software flagged an anomaly. Not a cable fault, not a physical break. The software flagged an incoming signal pattern it could not classify. Classification errors weren't alarming on their own. Pattern recognition software occasionally encounters signal architectures outside its training parameters, legacy encoding formats from older hardware, test signals from maintenance teams using equipment the monitoring software wasn't designed to see. I pulled up the raw waveform expecting something easy, a misidentified handshake protocol, a maintenance ping from a relay buoy. what I saw made me lean forward and go very, very still. The waveform was structured, not the way noise is coincidentally structured, not the pareidolia of seeing faces in static. The structure was deliberate, regular, and coded.
It had the unmistakable signature of modulated audio, the specific waveform architecture produced when a human voice is converted into a signal and pushed through a cable system. But it was coming from the wrong direction. Every signal on a cable system has directionality. It travels from an origin toward a destination. The origin for this signal, according to the reflectometry data, was not a relay station. It was not a terminal point. It was not any infrastructure I could identify on the system schematic. The origin point, calculated from the return timing, was somewhere along the section of cable that ran directly above a series of deep tectonic fractures in the oceanic crust. Cold seeps, hydrothermal vent fields, places where the rock itself splits open, and whatever exists beneath the thin shell of the ocean floor exhales upward in chemical plumes. The signal was coming from below the cable, from below the seafloor. I want to be honest about what my rational mind did with that information. I was trained in signal physics. I understood the actual science of what I was looking at, and my rational mind immediately generated a list of explanations. Geological piezoelectric effects, the way certain rock formations under tectonic stress generate electrical fields, can sometimes couple into nearby cables and produce noise that mimics structure. Hydrothermal vent activity can create thermal differentials that affect cable performance in ways that generate anomalous readouts. Real physical explanations existed. But I put on the headphones. I don't know exactly why. Converting raw cable signal to audible output was not part of our standard diagnostic process. I would have to route the signal through the station's audio conversion module, a piece of equipment we used maybe twice a year. I knew that. I did it anyway. The conversion took 3 minutes to initialize. I sat in the silence of the monitoring room, listening to the wind outside, watching the waveform pulse with that slow, rhythmic, deliberate structure. The overhead lights hummed in that specific frequency you only notice when everything else goes quiet. The module finished. I adjusted the headphone volume to mid-level, and then I heard it. It was a conversation. 2 voices. One was mine, not similar to mine, not resembling mine in the imprecise way that auditory pareidolia works. It was my voice, the specific pitch, the specific cadence, the precise way I clip the ends of certain words, a speech pattern so individual that my own mother would have recognized it from another room. The other voice was Marcus, unmistakably Marcus, with his flat mid-Atlantic accent and the way he always exhaled through his nose before saying something he considered obvious. And they were talking about events that had not yet happened. The me in the recording was describing, in specific detail, an argument I was going to have with our station director the following Thursday, an argument I had not yet considered having. The argument was about the maintenance rotation for the southern cable junction. I would demand a restructuring. The director, a woman named Priya, would refuse. Marcus would side with Priya. I would call Marcus a coward in front of the entire morning crew. And 3 days after that, the recording said, Marcus would be found in his car in the station parking lot, not moving. I pulled the headphones off so fast I'd knocked my coffee thermos onto the floor. I sat there with my heart doing something strange and arrhythmic in my chest. The thermos had rolled under the desk. Coffee spread slowly across the linoleum. The waveform continued pulsing on my monitor, slow, patient, completely indifferent to the fact that I had just heard my own voice predict the death of my coworker. I'll be honest about what I did next. I did not immediately report it. I told myself I needed more data. That was the rational response. Gather evidence before making a claim that would, at minimum, result in a psychological evaluation, and at maximum, end my career. I told myself a lot of things, and I believed most of them, because the alternative was accepting what I had heard at face value, and my mind was not prepared to do that while sitting alone in a cold room with coffee spreading across the floor. I ran the audio conversion 3 more times over the next 4 hours. Each time the signal progressed slightly. The recording of my voice and Marcus's voice moved forward in time, covering events that would apparently unfold over the following 2 weeks. I heard myself describe equipment malfunctions that had not yet occurred. A water intrusion in the eastern server room on a Sunday night,
damaging 3 primary monitoring nodes, a phone call from my sister that I had no reason to eject.
And threading through all of it, delivered not with drama, but with the flat, exhausted tone of someone reporting facts they have already accepted, the details of what would happen to Marcus. The recording did not describe an accident. Over the following 2 weeks, I kept listening. Every morning shift, I ran the conversion and documented the results in a personal notebook, hard cardboard cover, handwriting that grew progressively smaller and more compressed as the days passed, as if I was unconsciously trying to reduce the amount of space my findings occupied in the physical world. The records were meticulous: date, time, signal content, predicted event, actual outcome, deviation percentage. The water intrusion happened that Sunday, exactly as described. The accuracy rate, calculated over 14 days and 37 distinct predicted events, was 91.3%. I want you to understand what I thought I was looking at, and then I want to tell you what I eventually understood I was actually looking at, because they are not the same thing, and the difference between them is the part that I cannot stop thinking about at 3 in the morning. I thought the signal was predicting the future. That was my working framework for most of those 2 weeks, as wrong as it turned out to be. But as the documentation accumulated, as the accuracy rate held steady, I began to notice something that didn't fit the prediction model. The 9% of events that the signal got wrong were not random misses. They were variations. The events happened, but the surface details shifted. A different day, a different location, slightly different words. But the fundamental shape of each event was always there, always realized, like the same story told with minor regional differences across multiple retellings. And there were other voices on the recording. Not mine, not Marcus's, not anyone I recognized. They appeared gradually, first as background texture, a murmur beneath everything, then as distinct voices speaking in patterns that had the rhythm of conversation, but nothing I could identify as language. Not a foreign language, not a language at all in any conventional sense, but structured, intentional, the unmistakable architecture of communication, stripped of any content I could parse.
And beneath those voices, if I turned the volume high and held very still and stopped breathing, because even breathing generated enough vibration to muddy the lowest frequencies, beneath all of it, there was a sound I cannot accurately describe. Not because I lack vocabulary, but because it did not resolve into anything language could hold. A low-frequency resonance, continuous, patient, present in the signal from the very first conversion, underneath everything else, the way a foundation is underneath everything that happens above it. I had been hearing it for 2 weeks without consciously registering it. Once I registered it, I could not stop. On the 14th day, I took the raw signal data, specifically the section containing the unrecognized voices and the low-frequency resonance, and ran it through the station's geological analysis software, a specialized program we used to correlate seismic events with cable stress. I fed it the signal and asked it to match the spectral characteristics against our database of known geological phenomena. The software returned a result in 40 seconds. The spectral signature of the low-frequency resonance matched with a 96.8% confidence rating, a classified acoustic signature. Not seismic activity, not hydrothermal venting, not any geological phenomenon I had been holding on to as a rational anchor. It matched the acoustic signature of large-scale coordinated biological tissue, the sound an organ produces. Not a single organism, not a colony, an organ. The clinical word the software used in its classification report was peristaltic, the word for muscular contractions that move material through a digestive system. The sound beneath everything, beneath my voice, beneath Marcus's voice, beneath the unrecognized voices, beneath the entire signal, was the sound of something digesting. 3 days later, I brought the anomalous signal origin to Priya's attention. Not the recordings, not the predictions, just the technical anomaly, something transmitting from below the seafloor, requiring further investigation. I framed it carefully, professionally. Priya listened with the focused attention that made her good at her job. She asked precise questions. She reviewed my sanitized logs. Then she was quiet for a moment, looking at her screen, and she said something I have turned over in my mind every day since.
She said, "This isn't the first time we flagged an anomalous origin on the southern trunk." She said it the way you say something routine. She pulled up a record from 8 years earlier, before my time, before Marcus's time, when the station had a completely different crew. A similar anomaly on the same cable section, same origin region, same tectonic fracture zone. The record noted the anomaly and closed it without explanation. Signal artifact, source undetermined, no corrective action required. "Happens about every decade or so," Priya said. "Nobody's ever pinned down a definitive cause." I asked what the previous crew had done with it, whether they'd analyzed it further. She looked at me. Something moved across her face. Not alarm, but a kind of flat, controlled distance. The expression of someone who has already decided not to go somewhere and is making peace with that decision. "The previous team lead filed the report and moved on," she said. "That's generally what you do." She closed the record. She told me we'd add it to the anomaly log and flag it for review at the next quarterly assessment, 5 months away. She said it without any emotional content whatsoever, as if discussing a billing discrepancy. I walked back to my desk. I sat and stared at the waveform. I thought about the word decade, about what it meant that this signal appeared every 10 years, about what had happened to the crew that was here 8 years ago, and the crew before them, and the crews before that, stretching back to whenever these cables were first laid, and whoever first sat in whatever room existed in this place before this building was built, and put on headphones and listened. That night, I didn't go home. I waited until the station was down to night crew, went back to the monitoring room, and sat in the dark with the headphones on for 6 hours. The signal had changed. Not degraded, not amplified, changed in character. The voices I recognized had moved further along the timeline. Events I was still waiting for in my daily life were now referenced as past events in the signal. The recording of our future was arriving faster than we were living it. And the unrecognized voices were louder, more present, pushing up through the recording the way water pushes up through cracks in pavement after heavy rain, patient, persistent, indifferent to the structures above it. And the low-frequency resonance had begun to modulate, to pulse.
To move in a rhythm that was, and I'm telling you this calmly because that is the only way I can say it, synchronized with the human voices above it. The sound of digestion was keeping time with us. I found the archive at 4 in the morning. I was tracing a specific encoding anomaly in one section of the signal, something that looked older, lower resolution, like data that had been compressed and decompressed multiple times. I followed it through the reflectometry data back towards its origin point. It hadn't originated in the cable. It had originated in our own station's data storage, a section of the server housing old maintenance logs and archived signal data from the station's full operational history. Someone had been recording this signal for years, decades. Every 10-year iteration of the anomalous transmission, captured, stored, compressed, and retained in an archive that existed below the visible layer of our data infrastructure, below the interface, below anywhere you'd find it if you were only looking where you were supposed to look. I accessed the archive. The oldest files dated to the year the station was established, audio conversions of the signal, labeled with dates and the initials of the technician who had performed the conversion, different initials each decade, different technicians, different crews, different people sitting in this room with these headphones, hearing what I was hearing, recording it, preserving it, and then ending, in whatever way the recording had said they would. I opened the oldest file, compressed and degraded, partially corrupted, but intact enough to hear. A voice, not mine, not anyone I had ever known, someone who had sat in this station before I was born, in whatever this room was before this building existed, speaking in the quiet, meticulous tone of someone making a clinical observation. The voice said, "The signal is consistent with previous sessions. The origin remains the deep fracture zone. The content continues to advance ahead of real-time events at approximately 14 days. The voices I recognize are myself and 2 colleagues. The recording of my colleague Hester ends on the 22nd of this month." A pause. Then, "I believe the signal is not coming from below. I believe we are inside something that has already swallowed us, and the sounds we hear are the sounds of our own experience being processed." Another pause. Longer. Then, "I believe the cables are not infrastructure. I believe they are nerves." I left the station at 5:47 in the morning,
walked to my car in the dark, in the cold, in the smell of the ocean. The water was invisible beyond the bluff, but absolutely present. The smell of it, the feel of it in the air, the vast certainty of its depth, and its total indifference to whether I stood at the edge of it or fell in. I drove 6 hours without stopping. I didn't turn on the radio. I understand now why I didn't turn on the radio. In a motel room somewhere inland, I opened the notebook and wrote down the last observation, the one I had been refusing to write since 4 in the morning. The 9% deviation in the signal's accuracy was not error. The events always happened, just with minor surface variations. Different day, different words, different small details, but the same essential shape. Always, the same argument about schedules, the same small betrayals, the same ending for whoever fills the Marcus role. Over and over, 10 years apart, different names, different faces, the same roles, the same structure, the same outcome. Not prediction. Not transmission from below. Digestion. The same meal consumed in cycles, the material broken down, absorbed, excreted, consumed again. Nutrients extracted repeatedly from the same organic matter, rendered into signal, carried upward through the system, processed, released, and consumed again. Every crew, every decade, the same events with minor variations, different people filling identical roles, all of them becoming voices on a recording that the next crew would hear in their own headphones 10 years later. We are not users of a network, we are content. The cables do not transmit our communications feed the cables. Every word ever sent through them, every message, every call, every transaction is not data, it is food. And the thing digesting us is not beneath the ocean floor. The ocean floor is a membrane. We are inside the organism. We have always been inside the organism. The internet is the nervous system of a geological stomach, and humanity is what it eats, and it has been eating us in cycles long enough that the screams of every version of us that came before are still echoing back up through the glass, arriving in the headphones of whoever is unfortunate enough to listen closely enough to hear them. The signal I heard was not a message from the depths.